No matter who you are, where you are, what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed, the light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Live Well, Live Whole podcast series. I'm Marie Moeller, and I'm an author, intuitive, and a host of the Whole Soul Mastery podcast. And I'm here with Paul Panzica back again for us to share and stream and get into some things that just are in our hearts and minds to share today. And I love seeding it with that energy and then seeing where spirit guides us to talk today. So, Paul, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, why don't you lead us into some things that you've been thinking about in your journeying since we last podcasted, and or just what's relevant to you right now in this moment?
Well, there's a lot of relevant things. And as I had mentioned a little earlier, that I noticed that the channelings that you've been bringing forward are definitely on a higher octave or a higher level of consciousness. There's a lot of information that you've been presenting to us, and I think it's wonderful. It's amazing information, but it takes more effort and more contemplation to work through it. So in that sense, I think that it is coming to it kind of like almost in union with many of the things that I visioned, the visions that I've had with the astrology that we're experiencing at this time. And maybe that's true. Maybe we are coming to a focal point, so to speak, in what the ultimate truth is going to be or is. I think that the astrology of this time right now is telling us what that is. And it's something that we might want to spend a little bit more time going over. I mentioned this in a get together that we had a couple of weeks ago, but I think that it deserves to be looked at in a deeper perspective. And it has to do with something that you had mentioned in the last transmission that I saw with union with source. And I think that's really kind of the tone or the mission for the season that we are now in, which is spring of 2021. All right. So what I wanted to, there's many things to mention, so I'll try to work my way into this. Looking at the astrology is interesting. First, I wanted to mention this, and I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it now, that there's a lot of deception out there, right? There's a lot of deception. And I can have a vision, or you can have a vision, or we can watch something on a media outlet, and it may be truthful, and maybe it's not. Maybe there's distortion within that source. We may even be facing technologies that exist right now that could manipulate persons, let's say, consciousness in a dream state. They have been working on technology on that. I don't doubt the information that you bring forward, and I don't doubt the information that I bring forward, because it's up to our personal discernment to figure out what truthful vision is. But not everyone can believe it, and not everyone is at that high level of consciousness. So we have to kind of search, I think, the world right now for what I would say is objective truth. Where does objective truth come from? And I would say that we're running out of sources of objective truth in the sense that it's not on BitChute, and it's not on YouTube, and it's not on the major media networks. It's not on the social media. Where is it? Where is it coming from? And I still think personal vision is extremely important. But in esoteric science and esoteric training, in becoming an ascended human, ascended soul, we were given a promise regarding our education. We were given a maxim. We were given an axiom, a law that cannot be broken. It cannot be broken. And that law is simply as above, so below. That is the maxim of higher education. So if you want to know about yourself, you look at the bigger picture. And what I mean by that is we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. It's always been taught this way. And so when we want to know about ourselves, what we can do if we want to get objective information is we can look into the heavens, and we can look at the heavens and look at that as a reference point for what's happening within ourselves. As far as I know, they do not have the technology to manipulate the celestial heavens. It seems like an improbability to me. And we were taught in esoteric science or in esoteric training that God is present and creates a ring around us, which we call the logos. And that energy is bathing us and infusing us with that energy at all times. So that energy cannot be manipulated. It's there, it's in the heavens. And if you're interested in reading it, you can train yourself to read it. It's not that difficult. It's almost like we were taught this as children because we learned about it in mythologies as children. And if you understand the mythologies, you can understand how to interpret this information. So I think that the true objective information is there for us if we're willing to look at it and to try to analyze it and to understand what's happening within us. As I had mentioned before, we are living mythology through astrology, right? It's signifying from the heavens what's happening within us. And so there is some major events. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I don't use it, and I don't think most people, we don't use it on an everyday basis. It's not like, okay, I'm going to look at all the alignments of the astrology today or for tomorrow and plan on what my life is going to be tomorrow. And we just don't do that. It's impossible to do that. But you can feel it almost to a certain degree. And then for validation, you can look at the astrology. But we were told through our religions and through our mythologies that it was extremely important to look at it 4 times a year. And then I will also say that in certain extraordinary events, like a comet is coming that we haven't seen before, or if there's an eclipse, whether it's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, that's an important event. Look at the astrology. But for sure, we were told to look at it as time cycles or spirals through a year. And it creates a 360-degree spiral. So as we get to a point where it's turning its direction, that is what we as called the tropical astrology. It means as the turning, and that's where we would look at it. And that happens on the points of the solstice or the points of the equinox. And we have just reached the spring equinox. We just passed it. So it was a good point that happened on March 20th to look at the astrology and to see what that astrology was showing us. Well, the astrology is showing us quite a lot, but it's showing us something that I think is quite astounding. And it's happening. It happened, and it's still happening to a certain degree. What we would say a major conjunction or a major event, which is happening, and it has to do with the sun coming together with Venus. And so that sun coming together with Venus is an extremely important connection, and it's happening in a very interesting place within outer space or within inner space. And that's the really interesting part about this.
Wow.
Is that the astrologers 2,000 years ago fixed the time or fixed the astrology to the time that they were living in. This was not a mistake. It was done on purpose. It was done on purpose because time changed its characteristics and existence changed its characteristics to a lower plane of existence or a lower density. We were going through the final phase of lower density existence. It was the final age of lower density existence. So important that we started marking time in that way. And it was marked around the birth of Jesus Christ. So we called time after that point, which marked his birth, Anno Domini, which was the point where he was born. And it's the point that we are continuously tracking, so to speak. So the astrologers fixed the observation in the heavens to the reference point around the time that Jesus was born. So if we look in the heavens, with what's going on right now, is the sun is in one position and Venus is another position. If we look at the distant backdrop, it's not where it was 2,000 years ago. It's in a different position. But we created a system that marked the reference point to the time that Jesus was born. So it exists in the inner space. It doesn't exist in the outer space. It exists within us. So we have to use that as a reference point. It's called tropical astrology. It's the most common way that we use astrology. But it's interesting that the distant references are not what we actually seen from line of sight. There's something that were preserved and that we observe time, in this fashion, and that we observe the astrology in this fashion. Now, why is this important? And why it's important is that if we didn't mark time in this way and we didn't look at the celestial references in this way, we'd have missed something extremely important. And what is that extremely important thing that we're missing? We're missing the end of the age. We marked the beginning with the birth of this human being, of this extraordinary being. But we're also now seeing in that same reference point the end of the age, because we call the whole age the year of the Lord, or the year of our Lord. Now we're seeing at this moment, and the moment was just a few days ago, where the sun is at right at the beginning of a new time cycle. It's right at what we call the cusp of Pisces, which is the last sign of the zodiac. And now we're going back into a new reference point. And Aries is the new reference point. And that's where the sun is. The sun is in Aries. It just crossed in within 1 degree of Aries, less than a degree. Venus is right next to the sun, and that is in the last few minutes of Pisces. And so we're seeing, again, as I mentioned this in another discussion, we're seeing the beginning and we're seeing the end. All right. And we have this statement that Jesus made. And he said that I am the beginning and I am the end. I am the Alpha and I am the Omega, right? And so what we're seeing, in my opinion, is the end of the age of Pisces, the end of the age of the Savior, so to speak. So I think we're entering into a new age. But not are we entering into a new age. I think we're entering into a new perception of time. And that's really kind of the interesting part about all this, is that in 3D reality, we perceive things very literally and linearly, so that we see things in a past, a present, and a future time reference. This is how we've been conditioned to perceive time. But we can also perceive it outside of that reality, outside of that linear time continuum. This happens to us through near-death experiences, through dreams. I still do. I have dreams all the time, but when I had my visionary dreams, and I still get these once in a while, I'll have a vision that will predict the future. I know it's going to happen. So let me give you an example of how that works.
Yes.
I had a medical student who was just a fantastic, classy guy. He was one of the best students I ever had. He was the president of the class. And he knew that I was interested in dreams and dream analysis and these types of things. So he came into the office. He was doing a rotation with me, and he was like skipping and just really giddy and really happy. And he asked, I asked him, I said, wow, what's gotten into you? And he says, I just had this fantastic dream. I said, oh, that's wonderful. Let's go upstairs. I have an office upstairs. I said, let's talk about the dream and let's see how, tell me about the dream. So he went upstairs and he told me about this dream. And he said, in the dream, he was a dream of flight. So he was flying and he was soaring, and he was soaring around his old neighborhood, and he saw kids playing basketball, and he would swoop down and grab the basketball and dunk it, and he just felt free, and he was just elated that he could actually do this, and he was controlling flight. So he told me about this dream. I said, that's fantastic. I said, it's very important to have these dreams because it's what we would call a lucid dream. And in lucid dreams, you're learning how to control the dreamscape. What you're doing is you're learning how to control reality in another plane of consciousness, which we would call the astral plane of consciousness. I said it's very important for your spiritual development, your soul development, to have these dreams. I said it's so important that you may notice that those dreams that you're having will become entangled within your physical life, in your waking life, and that they may actually become almost predictive of things that may happen in your life. Now, he looked at me like I was crazy, and he rolled his eyes back in his head. He said, yeah, whatever, doctor, yeah, whatever. Yeah. He couldn't disagree with me because I was his mentor. So, right? They never want to confront you. So a week goes by, 7 days go by, and it's always an echo. I see these in dreams all the time. 7 days go by. He comes back, and this time he looks like he saw a ghost. He comes in the morning, and instead of skipping around and being elated, he was really shaken. I asked him, what happened to you? He said, I had another dream. I said, okay, well, come on upstairs. And we go upstairs, and I said, tell me about the dream. He goes, I was flying again. I said, well, that's great. Yeah. He goes, I was doing my thing, and I was dunking basketballs, and I was just having this great time. And then all of a sudden, a vehicle comes up to me in flight, in what we would say zero gravity flight, right? In some kind of a vehicle, futuristic vehicle. And out of the vehicle, which was a police car, is how he perceived it, was a police officer. And she was very beautiful. I said, okay. And she came up to me and in the air and said, you're recklessly flying. You have to learn how to control your flight. And she said, but I'm not going to write you a citation. I'm just going to give you a warning. And she got in her vehicle and she flew away. So then he really woke up in 3D reality. And so he realized he was late. So he rushed to get dressed and then he jumped in his car. He lived in a really nice place in Chicago, and a condominium. He whipped out into the traffic, and right behind him is a police officer. Yeah. So she pulls him over, and she gets out of the car, and she's this beautiful, gorgeous woman that he saw in his dreams. She comes over to him, and she takes one look at this guy, and he's really handsome, immaculately nice man. And so she taps on the window, he rolls on the window. She says, you're recklessly driving. And she said, but I'm not going to write you a citation. I'm going to give you a warning. And that was it. And so now you explain to me how that happens, right? And so how that happens is that we are always entangled within the physical reality. Our consciousness is always entangled there. But what we just experienced in that example was the past, the present, and the future melding together, right? So we can have conscious experiences outside of physical reality, or outside of linear consciousness, So in this instance, I would say that this is a prime example of what we would call synchronicity. And that's what people like Carl Jung, who came up with this idea, said that, your consciousness is entangled within the physical realm. It's just that our perception of time is limiting us in understanding how entangled we really are. So what I think is happening, what I suspect will be happening, will be that we will start perceiving time in a more plastic way, in a not so rigid way. And so that we will be able to develop intuitions about what may be happening more accurately in future references. We may be communicating with each other in nonverbal ways. You talked about when the word becomes one, the world becomes one, right? And so this is a new way of communicating. That reminded me of the Tower of Babel, right? You know, we went into this dense physical reality, and everything that was communicated had to be not only linearly expressed in a physical way, you know, but it was separate from the soul's speech, so to speak. It became separated from soul speech. And so I think that we're going through a transformation. And I think that, you know, what part of 2012, the spring of 2012 is representing is it's representing this new time period that we're now moving into. When I think that maybe not tomorrow, but I think that in the near future, maybe within our life, as time starts to change in as our consciousness starts to ascend and our perception of time starts to change and our experiences become more entangled within a more circular pattern of time, then I think we'll start marking time differently. I think that we may no longer call it AD anymore. It may be some new point when the spirit now is living within us, and that we may be looking at it in a more spiritual way. One of the things that Jesus told us is he said that when you have two gods, I mean, so he said when you have three gods, you have exactly that. You have three gods. He said, but when there's two or one, I am with you. So, I mean, this always just get people upset when I would do some of our adult education classes, and people would just get really bent out of shape because they were always taught that there's only one God. Well, what does he mean by three gods? Why is Jesus saying three gods? And so what he was making a reference to was something that was profound. And it has to do with the function of God. It has to do with the function of God within the linear time construct, within the linear time parameters, right? And we, through this perspective of time, we see that there was maybe a beginning to the universe, and that it's been around for maybe 15 billion years, and maybe it will go on for another 15 billion years. So there's a beginning, but there's also an end. We also see an end, right? So what this statement states is that the function of God in linear time is to birth, sustain, and destroy. To birth, sustain, and destroy. To birth, sustain, and destroy. And when you're living within that time matrix, the Lord of that time matrix is not Jesus. It's not the Logos. It's not the higher authorities, the higher self. You're living in a illusionary world, and that illusionary world which is ruled by time. And all of the gods in that time continuum have those three functions. And you have in the Eastern religions, you have Brahman, Vishnu, and Shiva, and then the Gnostics had Abraxas, which was a time god and has three components within him. So I think we're seeing the end of that period, and we're moving to a higher state of consciousness and maybe a higher state of perceiving time. Okay.
That was amazing. I mean, just did you want to share more? Were you bringing that around, or?
Well, so you know that we're in this relationship, right? And so and that we are looking at maybe not the birth, but the conception of a new way of perceiving time, and maybe this is the year that it starts to play out. And so I think that that's what's being initiated, at least in this season. But we also see a lot of unraveling and a lot of work that has to be done before we can start perceiving things in the right way. And as you mentioned, there was this concept of union with source in one of your discussions. You have to create a union with source, and that it's extremely difficult to do. And that you were saying that Very few people can accomplish that in this life, and that very few people can achieve it. And that outside of a death experience or a near-death experience, it's extremely difficult to do it. So this made me think about a lot of things. And maybe you can contribute to this also. But at the beginning of my ascension experience, which goes back quite a way now, I was totally confused. I was lost. I was aimless. I was looking for groups of people to try to connect to, and I found them for a period of time. But I kind of outgrew those, and I kept outgrowing those and outgrowing those and outgrowing those. So I found myself in New York City at a conference, and I was walking down Fifth Avenue. My family was with me, but I had some time before this conference, and I wanted to. It was a consciousness conference. It was a wonderful conference, and it was called Unbornness, and it was talking about how the soul travels beyond the physical life in the realm between the physical life and the rebirth again, and in your state of consciousness in a period of unbornness. And it was in a very enlightened, it was at NYU. And so here I was, I had an hour to kill. And so I found myself walking down Fifth Avenue in a funk, and I just didn't know what to do. I mean, I was trying to collect my thoughts, but I was completely in chaos at that time. So I saw this little Gothic church. I didn't know what it was. I walked in, and I went up to the pews up in the second story, and I sat down. It was empty, so maybe a few people were in it. There was no service going on, and I was confronted with this giant, enormous mural, and it was the mural of the Ascension. And it was the Church of the Ascension. And I had no idea what that meant at that time. I was just sitting there looking at this mural, and in that mural is a church, is a painting that I've always kept with me, by Edwin Blankenship, and it's a picture of the angel with the flaming sword. It's a beautiful picture that he did, and I think it's a perfect depiction of an angel, and it was in that building also, and I didn't even realize it was in that building. So I was at home in that building, but I understood that I was at a precipice. I was at a 0 point or a timeless moment in my life where I was making decisions, and I was figuring out how I was going to go forward, and I had no idea how that was going to actually happen, And then all of a sudden I was just flooded with tears. I couldn't stop crying. And that just for an hour, I just couldn't understand why, but I was just crying, right? And I was really, it was almost like it was cathartic. It was something that needed to come out. So I felt that this was my introduction to anthroposophical society. And in many ways, I still am, to a certain degree, a part of that, because I found within the structures or within the inspirations of the teachings, a true teacher who I needed to meet, who I never met physically, but I met consciously. So I was listening to the lecture, and there was a number of beautiful lectures, but finally this one man was giving a lecture on it. And he was giving a lecture on something that you have talked about recently. And you were talking about how we create union with Source. And you started mentioning that we have to see through through new lenses, right? We have to see through new lenses, right? Well, guess what those lenses are, Marie? They're your tears. You can only see through tears. What you need to see can only be seen through tears. And that's what that guy told me in that lecture 2 hours after I was bawling my eyes out, right? So it was profound, right? So unfortunately, I think we're at the point where we have to realize that you asked this question You said in the last lecture, or the last one I heard, you said this is this riddle. And what's the riddle? And the riddle is, what's keeping you from divine union with source? You asked that question, right? What's keeping you from divine union with source? So I would say that what's keeping us from divine union with source is fear. We've talked about this before, that we have to overcome our fear. And you've talked about that in the lecture also, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that there is a barrier that we have to cross. And in that barrier that we cross, you're going to be shedding a tremendous amount of tears. Now, what the astrology is promising, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic about this. I'm not pessimistic about this. Okay. I look at it and say these are challenges, and we have to face these challenges. But right now, there are people that think that they can outfox or outwit or outrun the reckoning that is coming and the reckoning that is here right now. They think that they can outrun it. They think that there's an egotistical way to outstrip it or not go through the experience that they are destined to experience. And that experience is going to involve a lot of tears. It's going to involve a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and a lot of tears. Because there are a lot of people out there, Marie, that will not voluntarily go through the process of becoming one with their source, one with union, unless they're brought to their knees and through tragedy, unfortunately, through hardship, unfortunately, and it will only be through their own doing, through their own egotistical decisions that they're making, that will very shortly bring them to a point where they will see through new lenses, or the lenses that they need to see through the tears that they will shed, unfortunately. And I think that's kind of what some of the astrology and what this is telling me. Yeah. Right.
Just like I know people feel this feeling that I'm feeling when I'm always in your presence, Paul, just the way that you can synthesize and synergize and communicate the places where you travel vibrationally through time, and the insights that you glean and the jewels that you bring back to us in conversations like these. It's just, I just like to savor that for a moment, because it's incredible when people enter that divine place inside ourselves of the muse, of this higher place where we are seeing from these higher lenses, and we're not afraid. We're receiving the downloads, we're exploring the codes, we're tracking ourselves through time. It's like we've left some of these texts and these insights for ourselves, these 1111 awakening codes, whatever we want to call this. You in that chapel, right? You in the Church of Ascension. These are no accident. I mean, just it's miraculous, and there's no way the little us can orchestrate those things, right?
Oh.
And once you have experiences like that and you appreciate them, you have more of them, which means we have more stories that you and I could share together, I'm sure. But there's so much of what you shared, and this is a powerful time. You mentioned the reckoning. In the transmissions the guides bring through, and I think my higher self understands this, the language of revelations. We are in this time of illumination, and you use the language of logos that is always infusing us and these physical realms and all realms with the living light, with this living life force, this living frequency of light that is creation, that is always pulsing like a breath for all of us, like a heartbeat. And to think that certainly in these lower dimensional realms, when we descended into this place where we are going to get further and further away from source, which means further and further away from union, that we were ever going to outrun where the light can touch. I mean, talk about the ultimate illusion, that we could outrun it so far, so fast, that we could actually create a new world. But the thing is is that the darkness doesn't really create. It needs light sources to create. And that's where the propaganda and other things that we don't need to go there fully, but we know that it's using the light source and life force of people who still have it to create the darkness that it's trying to create, to take us into this other realm of experience that's without God in some way. And yet I'm so moved when you talked about these lenses of perception that are going to be activating. Source is not worried. That's the way I have always felt, is that, and when I was in my time of the dark night of the soul, which was a very extended dark night of the soul and a very expansive dark night of the soul, that I think few people have gone through a kind of incineration alchemical process in the unique way that I had to. We all have our journeys. This was just mine. And I've understood later, as you go through that, anything less than that would not have gotten my attention. So talk about being on your knees. I know what it's like to be on your knees, and not for a minute, not for an hour, not for months, but for years. I know what it's like to still be on my knees. And I know about those tears. Bring me. I know about those tears deeply, deeply, because that's what created the new lenses through which I could see what was already there, but I couldn't see. We can't see until the tears come and activate a clearer soul sight inside us, and we resist. So I've said this many times, if somebody had tapped me on the shoulder and said, like your student, and said, oh, I've had a vision, and in 10 years time, you're going to go through this thing, and it's going to be a really dark tunnel, and it's going to look like light is never going to come back for you. Like, this is it for you, and do you want to go on that journey with me? I said, no, that sounds really fun for you, but I don't think I want to partake in that. But this is not how it works. And I think as souls at some level in the multidimensionality, the multiverse that we are inside ourselves, we script these experiences. And I clearly knew that I was at some level going to go through this. So as it was happening, it was shocking. And yet I also, at the same time, I did have an awareness that, like, I called it gutting. It really just cleared out everything in my system that was an illusion. Some things all at once and some things one by one. So it's like the pain wasn't quick. It's like taking off a Band-Aid. It wasn't just once and done. There were many spirals of the pain cycles that I had to go through in that process. And yet each time I was getting clearer and stronger. I wasn't getting weaker. I felt like I was being broken down to being built back up, but I was actually just being built back up. But I had to tear away all the things that weren't true. I had to tear away all those things. And would I have stepped up and chosen that? No. I mean, none of us would. But some of us are going to have to be in this time of reckoning. This is a biblical time. It is a biblical time. It has been forecast and foreshadowed. And the fact that you can tell that, share that wisdom of how we've tracked ourselves through time and this time God and AD with the birth of Christ. And that's also where so much of the Bible, has been informing us like a living map of what's to come. And Christ himself, I might not have the exact words, but I know some of his messages were be ready and get ready. Right? Because he knew the new birth was coming. He was saying, get ready, which was also inviting us into union with Source, because we'd been in this dense realm for so long. And it's like the hands of time are winding down on this experience. And you are going to be summoned to what was called, maybe you can help me out with this, but Judgment Day. This is the day of reckoning, but it's for all souls to come clean. It's for souls to get clean, to go through our own car washes, to go through the dark night of the soul. And those tears are purifying tears. I've had 2 occasions in my life where I literally cried my way through the alchemy. I didn't know that. You're giving me some of this language today, but I think I cried for a year. It was when I had rediscovered Lemuria. And I must have been carrying all that inside me of trauma and tragedy or sadness and the feeling of loss. I didn't know any of that. That was in the middle of my dark night of the soul that was about 5 years long, at least. So somewhere at the center point of that, I rediscovered Lemuria and all that I lost there. And so I had compounded tears, which was extraordinary. But I remember then, just like I know now, is that I just cried until I was done. You know, a lot of people don't let themselves have that. Is just let it come out. And I had nothing else to lose but to let it come out, because I was in the throes of this hero's journey and this deep cleansing process. So I did, and I saw with new eyes, and I saw Lemuria after that year. It took 12 months. I didn't know it was going to be 12 months, but it took 12 months of tears, 12 months inside this dark night of the soul that was still going on. But that particular slice of my soul's history, I felt joy. I could see, and Lemuria is not gone. I actually know it's just a vibrational consciousness that went out of my ability to see it. So even though there were cataclysms and all kinds of events that surround that story and that part of our history, I had been carrying the loss and the way we lost it and all the trauma around that, but it was gone. And I keep feeling, I have to say this, the tears that you described is like a prism. It's like, you know, allowing me to see, like the light shining the way it shines through a prism, and you get to see something different,
Right.
right? I literally feel this
These
prism,
are the lenses. Yes.
right? Are
Yes.
the lenses, and I could see clear, and I felt better, and I was lighter. I didn't feel that the whole way going through, but once it was the cycle was complete, I felt crystal clear, like a crystal prism. And the same thing with my other, you know, the bigger cycle that I was journeying, this other cycle. And the same thing, you take the next step and you take the next step. But my next steps were walking myself out of the old world that was peeling away down to stripping me down to this really naked form. And in the nakedness and in the tears that are streaming and this just shock to the system of what's happening, because you think some of this kind of pain is not even conceivable to the mind, that we could think that this level of pain, that we could face something like this. And yet that's like source, in a way, peeling back the layers of the onion that is us, and peeling back the divinity codes inside us and filling us with breath the whole time. And that story, I'm not somebody that quotes more religious language or spiritual language. God-given language is kind of coming back to me. And that story of someone walking alone on the beach and they're suffering, and there's just two footprints, right? And it, even as a kid, that was one of the ones that stuck out for me. And I know a lot of people quote it or reference it, but few really tap into like the depth of what that is really meaning. And that to me is not just that God carried. If our listeners remember that story, it's a story of somebody who was in a time of deep challenge in their life, and they felt abandoned and alone and devalued and discarded and all those negative lower vibrational emotions in a time of deep challenge, and kind of called out to God and say, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me? Right? Which could be the cry of anybody in a 3D matrix. We could all call out and say those very same things. And God said, basically, I was with you the whole time. I was carrying you, right, in that time. And I think there's a moment that we go through that when we think we're the most alone, we're the most, you know, exhausted, we're the most depleted, we're just not sure, you know, how we're going to make it through something like that. And then you hear this, feel this insight coming when you've, you know, even mustered the energy to even be kind of frustrated or angry at the being forsaken. And then you go through this experience and you're like, and you know the truth. And when God says that to you, I was carrying you the whole time, right? That is this part of the journey. We are being carried at the same time. We're being, all the layers are being stripped back and peeled back. And I would say in that footprint story from the Christian faith that people often reference, I would say God wasn't just carrying us. God was like breathing us. God was giving us life when we felt like everything we thought was life was leaving. Right. And that is just the most profound experience. And this is the experience I chose to go through it the way I did, at a soul level, not consciously, but to go through that experience. Not to say that since then I haven't had more layers to peel back because the layers of the onion just, are abundant, and either they don't necessarily regrow, but we're multidimensional beings. So there's so many layers to us. But now through that experience, I have the vision and I have the tools, and and I have the heart. And so when you have that warrior energy, you have the heart and the tools and the vision. Well, you can go through anything. You can walk through fire and not get burned, right? And some people haven't even yet begun this process. And we are here, Paul, I think, the two of us, to be messengers of, you've lived this too in your own ways. You've been seeking, gone through some incinerations yourself. You've gone through something, calling out and crying out to God, why have you forsaken me? Right? I think we all do it. But you and I have conscious memory of doing that already this lifetime, in a time where time is becoming different, and in a time where we're going to go through this in a much more rapid pace. And some people are totally unprepared. And yet I would say in many ways, I felt unprepared for what I had to face. And yet we do it. We do face what we have to face. And that time is coming for humanity as a collective, but also as individuals. And the things we have not wanted to see about the darkness in this realm, that is a creation. And I know a lot of people would say the darkness is of God too. And I understand in a really big macro lens, that's true too. But I think in the details of this ascension process, and as we're shifting timelines and we're shifting time itself, we're also having to choose the details of all of creation that we're bringing with us and the ones that we're leaving behind. And it's not time for a 3D realm to go portal up into this new realm that is being formed, that is being birthed. It's a time of conceiving. So that we both have said a lot of things, but I feel like, number one, I just want to reiterate is that we're all going through it. Some people feel like they escaped like the jaws of, death, of what that is, the old dying, and we can't. And if people haven't had some of these experiences, some version of that is coming to find all of us to peel those layers back, because they're just not who we are. And there are parts of us, even like Lemuria, that when that struck my consciousness, it was kind of a surprise. Somebody had mentioned it at a gathering I went to. Didn't even know about Lemuria, but the minute it was activated and I started just looking it up online, I just started weeping. And then again, I wept for 12 months. So you don't know how the message is going to come to you. You don't know the thing that's going to activate the trigger where the tears are going to begin to flow. But it's in the tears that God begins to breathe us, and that we go into this place of divine surrender where we fall back in faith into the arms of God, right? Into the heart of God. It looks like we might be alone. And it can be terrifying to some people or traumatizing, but once you don't fight it and you don't wrestle with it and you surrender into the heart of Source, we are lifted through these things, and these things do burn away. And I think I know that that's part of my message, is that I'm a believer. I have come through some things that most people can't even imagine facing. And I know that Source not only lives in me, but in everyone. And we all are going to go through this process, and we're all coming back into union. And we've all received the invitations. We've all received the invitations, and they keep coming. And some people are like, I don't hear anything. I don't, and they're just like, yeah, not me, not this time. I'm going to pass. But everyone has to accept the invitation at some level, because it's a requirement now. It's a requirement to be in physical form, to accept the invitation at whatever level you can and in whatever ways that's going to manifest. I think all invitations have more or less been accepted. They just might not have manifested. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I think we're at Brad Johnson. He channels Adronis. He's an interesting guy. But he talked about 2021 as the point of no return. And I see that. And you mentioned something too about a bifurcation as we're going around a city right around the same time. So there is this bifurcation. It does exist. And and then there's one group that's taking one path, another group that's taking another path. But the point of no return is simply, are have you the courage to stand up for yourself? Have you found the strength within yourself? And do you claim your own sovereignty? Those that are doing that are are not going to succumb to all the lies and the propaganda and the deception, but they're still going to witness, and they're still going to be marginalized, and they're still going to go through hardship. They're going to learn their lessons in that, on that avenue. And then you have the others that think that they're going to just escape the whole thing.
Free.
Right. And guess what? Now they're the ones that are going to really understand how betrayed the betrayal that will happen to them, and the suffering and the pain that will happen to them. They're trying not to face. See, those who understand the spirit and those who are inspired are never going to go through all of the lies, because they can see right through it. So they can see the deception. Now, will that other camp suffer? The ones who can see through the lies and deception, in the minority, I would say now at this point, we will suffer by watching our loved ones suffer, and by trying to do what we can to get them through this. Maybe there's things that will happen in the future that may help them. I know that there's technologies that do exist from a healing perspective that may even help them if they've gone through this self-induced suffering or misery that they're all lining up to become a part of. So that may happen. But something that was really interesting, two things. Number one, if you look at the astrology of this spring, the sun, which I said is in a very interesting position and is in Aries, which means it's exalted. It's just loves to be in Aries, and it's divine manifestation in Aries. And Venus is exalted, and she's in Pisces, divine manifestation. She's also in conjunction with Neptune. It's beautiful. It's all awesome. But right next to the sun is Chiron. And Chiron is an amazing energy. Chiron is what they call the wounded healer. Now, you can't make this stuff up, right? It's happening at this time, in real time. And so Chiron was a centaur, and Chiron was the teacher of all of the great Greek heroes in the pantheon. He taught them. He taught them how to be heroes, how to be real human beings. He taught them poetry, he taught them archery, he taught them how to be the full manifestation of who they were supposed to be. And he was accidentally wounded, and it was a mortal wound. And so he was, because he was such a selfless being, in the end, what he winds up doing is he winds up taking the place of Prometheus, who was a Titan who was chained to rock and suffering forever and ever and ever and ever. That in itself is a long story. So he takes the place of Prometheus, and he sacrifices not only himself, for the greater good of mankind, but also for the suffering for the gods himself. He was so well loved that the gods, in honor of his death, they put him up in the sky. And he is literally the representation of Sagittarius. He's the centaur. He's Sagittarius. He's the hunter. So the point is that energy represents a wound that does not heal. And we have lived through many lifetimes. And for me, it's the Cathars. The image of the Cathars. I know I was there. And I know I've suffered with them, but I know it goes further back than that, to the Gnostics and maybe to the times of Atlantis. I have no idea. But guess what we've done, Marie? In order for us to survive this third density reality, you mentioned it in your talk, by the way, is that you cannot expose yourself, or you cannot be the full manifestation of you, or you cannot love without conditions, because if you love without conditions, we'll crucify you. Right? That's how that works. So you learned over time to suppress these traumas, to suppress the suffering, and you carry it within you. It's a soul wound that goes all the way back to Lemuria, which was earlier than Atlantis, right? And you carry that with you. And what this is happening right now as we speak in the spring is that Chiron is in conjunction with the sun. And so those deep, dark wounds that you've been hiding are now being exposed. And so because Chiron is placed in Aries, that represents the deepest and darkest and most painful wound. That's the one that you're hiding. The Lemurian experience, or the experience of the Cathars, or the experience of the Gnostics. I've lived through all of those genocides, and I learned that by keeping your head down and not being the full manifestation of who you are, you can get by. You mentioned this also, that we've
Yes.
learned to do time, right? This is a pleasant prison planet. We got very good at doing time, but this you can't escape. This is why these feelings are coming back, and it's coming back with a vengeance. There's so many people now that their soul memories are awakening to this. Now, what's really nice about this is that if you can connect to that soul memory, the deepest and darkest wounds that you've been suffering with for ages, that's what's being uncovered. Many people are still, doing this and doing that and doing this because they don't want to go through that process, because that process will trigger those tears. But those tears are therapeutic. They will allow you to see through clearer lenses. But because the sun is placed in Aries and it's exalted in Aries, that transformation will happen like that. It's not going to be a long process. It's going to be very quick. It's going to be a very healing process. It isn't going to linger on for a long period of time. It's going to happen. And it's destined to happen. And again, I'm this pessimistic guy to a certain degree, and I go, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it looks like we're being forced to reckon with this. I think that when enough people realize that they've been deceived again, then they're going to say, well, I got to face this. I have to face with what they've done to me, what they're doing to me, what they're doing to me, what they're doing to my children, what they're doing to my community, what they're doing to the world, what they're doing to Gaia. They're doing all of these things, and they're getting away with it with an impunity right now. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention, judgment, right? So if you go to the Sistine Chapel and you look and there's God, and you go to the Vatican and you're going to see all of these amazing and overblown examples of what God is, and it's this externalized, egotistical God, all pointing that finger at you and judging you, right? And you go in there, you see these ginormous statues, they're like 20, 30 foot tall, and in there they're pointing spears at you, and they're pointing their fingers at you to remind you that you're just this peon, you're nothing, you're worthless in this hierarchy that they've created, right? But not, you can take the entire enormity of all of it, all of the works of art and all the relics, and none of them are worth one human soul. The value of one human soul is worth more than all of those relics and all of those ideas combined, because that's what the architects of hierarchy created, so that they can live and feed off you like a vampire off of your own soul. They value your soul more than all that stuff because that's just worthless to them. They're feeding off of human energy.
It's the life force.
It's life force.
It's the life force.
So we get trapped in all of this. We get trapped in all of these paradigms and all these other things. And where does judgment really occur, right? And so the Greeks used to always say that that we are just pawns, in this giant game that they're creating. And you can almost say, well, you can look at it from the astrology of the thing is that they're having this influence upon us, but we have free will, and what they're doing always has two paths. You can take the low path and you can take the high path, and the astrology right now is saying it. You can do either one of those things. If we get a chance, I'll get to that. But what I wanted to bring up was that is that we're forced to face all of these things, but the reality is it's just a game. It's just a freaking game, right? And so this is something that Carl Jung, who I absolutely admired, and he would say this, look at your life, and he would say, here you are, being a player in this game, and I think that we talked about the race of Seth. Those are the ones who've disengaged from this, but those are the ones who are more childlike. But those who are involved in this game, all being prodded and stimulated and directed through fear and ego-based agendas, right? So that you have all these people that are trying to preserve their life, and Jesus told us those who try to save their lives are going to lose it, right? And so here you are doing all these things, and what does it matter in the end? Because it's the same end for everybody. We all die. Everyone dies, right? So, and we go through the cycle again and again and again and again and again and again and again, right? So, as he described it, it was like you go through all of these egotistical endeavors, only through this illusion of power, this illusion of importance. But you know what? I mean, maybe I'm 45 years old and I'm at the top of my game. I'm not 45 anymore. I'm 57. So I'm telling you right now, I'm over the hill. I'm going downward, and it's just going to keep going faster and faster till I will be at 87. No one will care about me. No one will care about what I think, what I do. Nothing, right? Because they give you some control and then they take it all away. So at the end of all of this, you die. And think of it, I always thought of this as an amusement ride. This is the most expensive and most elaborate amusement ride ever designed in the universe. And what they say is that there's billions of souls waiting to have the experience to take this ride. They say that as human beings, as souls or spirits living in this world, it's a great honor to be able to do this. It's a great privilege to be able to do this because we're experiencing this free will amusement ride, right? But at the end of all of this, you die. What happens? You die. You tumble out of this amusement ride like a giant slide or something like that, and you spill out onto this floor, and you're still there, and you're surrounded by the pantheon of the gods, and you will be judged by the riotous laughter of the gods. It won't be like you think. They'll be laughing at you. They will be laughing at the stupidity of yourself. And if you understand that, life, it's the most serious thing you'll ever experience, but on the other hand, it's the most absurd thing you'll ever experience. So the balancing all those energies, life is the most, it's the most macabre and absurd thing. And on the other hand, it's extremely dangerous and serious, right? But it's all of those things. And so at the end, what it really is life of Brian. Life is just a joke, right? Always look on the bright side of life, because that's Eric Idle is singing that as he's being crucified. The point is that it's absurd. And he says, and death is the final word. And in the end, you're still going to be you. You're going to spill out onto this floor, and you're going to realize that there's this giant joke that's been played upon you. The question is, and this is what Jung proposed as a question. He said, will you get the joke? Will you get it at the end? Will you understand how absurd this really was? And to those who can laugh with the gods, they're the ones who got the joke. They get it. They get it. And if you don't get the joke, you will be ashamed, and you will not be able to stand up tall in front of those who are judging. Now, I think that we judge ourselves. I think really that's where judgment comes from. But we're connected to all of those energies. All of those energies are part of us. And so I think that, I don't even know where I started on this, but I think that there is this great awakening, that we are destined to face all of those deep wounds that we've been suppressing forever, and all this great awakening in all of these people. And in the end, you have to realize that this third density reality is just a joke. It's just an illusion. Now, when we ascend allegedly to 5D, we're not supposed to experience this anymore. We're supposed to actually have learned those lessons, and we are now living in a state that we can control, that the gods no longer have control over. Right?
Well, and that's the most empowering, or the exciting part of the whole journey, is that when it can become that adventure of you reclaiming you reclaiming your divinity codes, your union with source by your choosing, And by you choosing, not everybody chooses it in the transmissions that come through me as this channel, right? But I seem to be, at this point, I've been chosen to be the messenger of these particular messages. And the invitation is to union, because that's when we transcend the theater. And for all the transmissions that have come through, the guides have given that, where you say it's a big joke, it's a big game, it's a big theater, it's the greatest show on earth.
Right.
There is
Right.
this ticket to the amusement ride, right? And to the adventure. And some people know that it's a game, and they've been playing it even knowing it's a game. And then there's a part of us when we're ready to say, I'm turning in my tickets. Somebody else might need these. I'm out. And because we've done the ride from every aspect and every angle, and we're complete. And now that used to be more on an individual basis, that we would see certain sort of spiritual masters attain that level of enlightenment, and they would walk out of the theater, they would walk out of the game. And they would make that choice consciously while they were in physical form. They were making that choice. Now, what people don't really realize is, in the cycle of time and in the cycle of the astrology that you know so beautifully well, is that the whole collective is everything's being accelerated for this choice to leave this theater as this collective right now behind, right?
Yes.
That we don't need this for our spiritual evolution, and it is time for union with source. And to me, that's just another language. I haven't said it before, but union with source is 5D. What do we think unity consciousness is? It's not something that's out there. It's something that happens in here. And we have to go through the reckoning and the judgment, which is really our own lifetime's review, to access that primal wound, that deep unhealable wound inside us. And it's unique for all of us. Not everybody's going back to Lemuria the way I did, or to this other event and this other aspects of me that I had to face and clear. We all have that unique invitation, but the destination to unity consciousness is the same. And like I've talked about, we just, that bifurcation. Some people are looking at the other side, at the minority, and saying, oh, they're going to get roasted. Like, they're really headed to the, something's coming for them, when they don't realize, well, they're doing this, the fire's right here, right? And we're all going to go through it to get to this place of unity consciousness. But it's like any one of us, and you are a physician, so you know this, we can all get hit with a cold, or let's not go into COVID, but we could just get a little cold, right? And every one of my family members will express that cold differently. Somebody's got sniffles, somebody's got a sore throat, somebody's got a headache. We all have something different. But we all go through that, and we all come out the other side and are healthy, and we've grown because of that. We've learned something in that experience. And maybe that's what COVID ultimately is the grand global flu that's catalyzing all of these symptoms to come forward that have been suppressed, for this alchemical process that's happening, for us to unite with the breath of God, because that is the living life force. That is 5D. And we all will get the invitation and have to face that invitation and what it entails in the hero's journey to enter. Admission is by vibration. I finally made the poster, right? Admission is by vibration. We've all been invited, but you have to go through something so you can be the vibrational frequency of unity with source, of union with source. You don't get to go through the portal because you just won't have the breath that you need to go through it.
Right.
So that's what you and I think, are doing in our messages. I love talking to you because it's always so rich, and it's always so soulful, and it's like the marrow of why we live. It's the marrow of why we're here, you and I, Paul. This is what we do. This is how we live. And sharing these messages, if it touches one soul, if it activates one candle in the central sun, well, then we've done our work. We've done our job. And that is what we're here for. And that's what I know is part of my passion, and what fills me with life force, even on the days where it's hard. And I can see this heavy energy coming to find many people that I know, and they don't have this awareness, and they look at me and they probably pray for me. they're probably those people who are praying for Marie and saying, oh, I hope she finds her way. And I am finding my way. And even if I was lost, even if that's possible, I feel the most found in my life living this union, this authentically, this courageously, this passionately, this creatively than I have in lifetimes. And so if anybody wants to accuse me of being lost, they or judge me for being lost, they can, because I feel found, right? I am found in who I am. And even though I'm still discovering more and more of who I am, I see life now. I'm out of the game. I'm just in the adventure. I'm out of the game, but I'm in the fun of the adventure. And we're still in somewhat in between timelines. But I know I'm headed and I'm walking with source, and source maybe is carrying me. I don't know, but I feel like I'm breathing divine backup and infusions of life every day. Whereas I felt alone and unconscious, really, that even this level of feeling whole inside myself was possible. I didn't even know it was possible. And I think that happens for anyone who goes through these experiences of the hero's journey, just like you do after you have a flu or something and you feel like, wow, that was pretty unpleasant. That was really ugly. And yet, when those of us that do come out the other side of those things, we have a deeper appreciation for health. We have a deeper appreciation to just be able to take a deep breath, and that's also what this time is about. COVID has given us the contrast to know what it's like, how good it feels just to breathe. No mask, nothing holding us back, only the adventure ahead and creation awaits. That's what I feel like. I feel that energy of the best is yet to come and the best is happening now, while simultaneous to the best, some of the worst might be happening too.
Yes.
Right? And that's quite a container to be breathing that in, where the worst and the best could be happening simultaneously in one moment. That seems to be some of what you've also described with the astrology.
Right. So the other major feature of the astrology is something that it's like a triangle that forms at certain angles, and it's called a YOD or a yod, and it's there also on at the beginning of the season. So if you're looking from the Earth's perspective, you have one celestial body here, another here at about 60 degrees, and then if you turn to the side and look from one corner, there's another one that creates a triangle, and that's 150 degrees symmetrically on those ends, and so it forms a yod. And the yod is considered, it's kind of like a narrow triangle like this, and so it's considered the finger of God. And so when you see one of these, and they're not that common, but when you see one of these patterns, it invites you to look in the direction that it's pointing towards, right? And so it's there. It was there on the 20th. It was there at the equinox.
All right.
Right. And so it was there, and it was interesting because it was drawing off of. It was pointing towards a planet, an asteroid called Vesta, and Vesta is a divine goddess. And Vesta is interesting because she represents the hearth, she represents home, she represents health and prosperity, but she also represents the executive administration of Greek politics, of Greek government. So it's very interesting that she has this executive connection or executive function in governmental structures. So she's placed in Virgo, and she's very, very, very comfortable in Virgo. And in Virgo, it suggests that there is a divine plan in place that's moving at its own pace, and that it will be executed to the utmost perfection. Precision. Right. Now that the yod is pointing towards that, and it's connected to Saturn on one end, which is all about time. It's all about structure. It's all about details, and it is about ego. So it's connecting there, and then the other base is connected to Ceres, and Ceres is also, it happens to be connected to Chiron, which is connected to the sun. It's very interesting. But Ceres is the divine feminine, and her mother was a Titaness called OPS ops and OPS ops, and she was mother to many of the gods. Ceres was one, and Zeus was another one, and their father was Kronos or Saturn. So it's very interesting that we don't have ops out there, and a planetary body or an asteroid that affects us, but we do have Ceres, so we can look at that as a lower octave or a closer manifestation to her mother. So you see that divine father, divine mother, and those are directly related to Vesta, and we could say that they're the parental energies of Vesta. So they're empowering this energy, and Vesta represents then this divine plan. Now, it's interesting that OPS is directly related to the word opus, OPUS. Opus means a grand work or a great work, right? And so we use this term as an alchemical term, meaning magnum opus, meaning the great work. And anyone who knows alchemy or practices alchemy understands there's only one great work, and that's the ascension of the world. And that's also on a macrosomic level. On a microsomic level, it is the soul marrying the spirit, right? And so the soul marrying the spirit. So this grand work, or this great work, is being drawn attention to in this celestial pattern, right? And so we're looking at then the great work, or the magnum opus, which is when the world starts ascending in Christed consciousness. Now, it's interesting that you can also look at it as the Great Reset, right? So it depends on what path you're on, right? And what's interesting is that that these energies are connected to. It's interesting that it's connected to Mars, and Mars is squaring Vesta at this point, so also squaring Mercury, but it doesn't matter. It's activating this grand plan. When you have energies that are confrontational to each other, they form what they call a square or a 90-degree angle. And so Mars is now activating whatever the heck this grand plan is, whether it's a Great Reset or a magnum opus, I don't know. But it's going to happen, I think, in the spring. And Mars is interesting because Mars is placed in Gemini. So Mars has two paths. One path would be, Gemini is the twins.
Right.
There's twins. And so one twin was Castor and the other one was Pollux. And one was perceived to be a vanquished soldier, vanquished warrior, and the other one was considered to be a heroic warrior. So one is disgraced through death in battle, and the other one is exalted in death and battle. So it represents two potential pathways. And so we could be looking at a system that's activating both pathways. So those in lower states of consciousness are going to experience the Great Reset. Those who are in the higher states or ascending their consciousness will become more heroic, will experience this magnum opus, so to speak. So that's how I see it. Now, I also see from the yad, the way that the yad is set up, I don't see that energizing or empowering the outcome to the Great Reset. The Great Reset is anti-spiritual. The Great Reset is anti-human. The Great Reset is draconian, right? And so that's always been the force that the heroes have fought against. Opus, or Ceres is Mother Nature. Ceres has nothing to do with draconian energies. Ceres has nothing to do with devastating her children. She is the divine goddess. Whether you're looking at it as Ceres or whether you're looking at it Opus. Opus is a champion of the gods and therefore a champion of humanity, because she was the one who saved Zeus from being eaten literally by Saturn or Kronos, and she swallowed him and she raised him to become a champion to fight for the humanity and the human cause. So she's a champion of humanity. So that energy is empowering Vesta. So I don't see a dark outcome from this. I see that the spiritual realm will eventually overcome this and through this struggle, but it's being triggered right now, as we speak. So Yeah, I think that that's part of the grand plan, or part of this grand alliance, which is up there. This magnum opus, is this great plan, and I think that we have no idea how that's going to manifest, right? So that's the scary part. The scary part is I can't conceive it. I can't. My egotistical mind can't conceive it, because when I start putting things together, it all goes down the negative path, and it all becomes enslaving, and I just throw up my hands and go,
I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that feeling.
right, right, right.
And at the same time, we're also offered this opus, this cosmic song,
Yeah.
this song of unity and returning to what we always once were, but just simply forgot for a time.
I mean, the gods are helping us. The alignments are insanely interesting, because even in that alignment that I showed you, and you have the Mars is squaring Vesta. Well, on the opposite end of Vesta, in what we call an opposition, is Mercury, and Mercury is, and again, in a very tight conjunction with Athena. Athena is a goddess of war, so you have Mars squaring off with Athena. Anytime Athena goes into battle, she never loses, because the true heroes have always invoked her presence. Those who are on the side of justice, those who are on the side of the human cause, always fought with this goddess. And if you didn't fight with the goddess, you weren't going to be successful. So she's there, and she's also represents human forethought, and she's in conjunction with Mercury, which is hermetic, and then Hermes. This hermetic is represents human understanding. So you have these very powerful energies that are creating this alignment. Also, very interestingly,
Hmm.
is that there is Mars squaring off to Mercury, right? It creates on the opposite end of the opposition. It creates a 90-degree angle. So now you have a war against, or conflict against Mercury. Now, Mercury is also Hermes, hermetical wisdom, which is healing wisdom. The symbol of Western medicine or Western healing is the staff of Hermes, or the rod of Hermes, or what we call the caduceus. So now you have a war against holistic healing occurring at this time also. You can also interpret that signature as a war against life, or against life forces or life principles. Also could be easily interpreted as biological warfare.
Yes.
So if you're looking for a signature, it's right there at this time. And there is a war being waged against humanity, against healing principles, holistic principles. It's all there. It's all happening right now. Right. And so we have to develop, again, this heroic stance, and we have to follow through with our convictions. And that's the thing is, Maurice, I have no idea, how to get to that higher path. I mean, I take it one day at a time. One day at a time. What can I do today to make things a little bit better? What can I do today to remain in my 0 point, in my still point, to get through the day? Because I don't have the plan. God has the plan. The Logos has the plan. The Spirit has the plan. And all I need to do is maintain my relationship with those energies. And I think that it'll carry us through, or carry me through.
That's exactly it. That is exactly, I mean, that is my experience and my opinion and my journey and all the things that have been shown to me. It is finding our way to unify with source, and to take those steps to just feel appreciation for nature, feel appreciation for something that is beautiful, connecting with that life force inside us. However we do it, we all do it differently. But I find nature to be a really easy, beautiful expression of the divine to appreciate, right? And just it's not, some people think that the spiritual path has to be hours and hours a day, or all this rigor, or all this, all these challenging things, and these rituals that we set up. It's just literally just saying words like, I am willing to connect with the source within me, right? I feel the light in me that is the light in you. I appreciate this tree in front of me. That's a spiritual experience. That's unifying with the divine right there. If anybody has pets, connecting with them and feeling life force flowing in them, and the mirror that they are to us, of us and our divinity. They never forgot. It's the humans that, have been disconnected in this cycle and window of time that I think many of us are exiting the theater. We've retired our costumes, right? And the thing is, in the past, maybe we pass them on to somebody else, but the truth is I can't really pass them on to my neighbor, not so much, because I know she doesn't or he doesn't need the costume either. We don't need our costumes. So I think that's why we need to alchemize them away and go into this place of spiritual nakedness with ourselves and just find our way into faith and the divine breath inside us. And it's that simple. It's that simple. And it is something that I didn't have this language because I went through my cycle of forgetfulness too. You reacquire it, just listening to a podcast. This is pretty deep. So if people are still in here with us, we thank you, right? We thank you for hanging in there with us, because that's what Paul and I can do. We can, um, push all this stuff to the surface that becomes language, that becomes tools for the hero's journey. And when you don't have the language, you don't have the tools, the word is fear. And it does get scary and we do feel overwhelmed. But when you have the tools and you can call in the gods, you can call in the backup, you can call in divine breath, you're walking through some doorways ahead of us that we don't know what's on the other side, but we know what we have with us because it's all inside. That's what Source is knowing. When Source is watching the billions of us here on this planet, knowing that every last one of us is going to go through this process at some level, Source isn't worried either, because Source knows that in our codes is every skill and tool and wisdom and ability that we need. It's all in here. It's not going to be in our devices. It's not going to be in the propaganda. It's not going to be on the news. This is where it's coming from in here. And we're learning to trust that again. And sometimes we do trust these tools when we first start out. I know I tried some tools and they didn't work out for me so well. I tried, but I was learning, which is it's discernment. Is this tool needed? Is this a good tool for me? Is this not the right tool? Do I need better tools? And those are resources. We're also called in this time of discernment to cultivate more of these, discerning what tools to use and when and what to call in and all of that. So I love where we go, because nothing is planned, but we open and we let spirit lead us in what's on our hearts, what's flowing through us, and we feel the pulse of humanity. We're very connected, you and I, tuned in to humanity and the tasks before us. And I want to thank you, Paul. I want to thank you. Just, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to be in these frequencies with you. And it's a blessing for any of our audience that spend this time with us. And it might be now, it might be a week from now, or people, as they go through more of their doors, they may find us a few weeks or months or years from now, right? But it'll still be here. And we're seeding that because there's a timelessness to these seeds. They're just seeds for whenever is right time. It's not for any specific time. It's just the right timing. So thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. I will have Paul back again, always, because the conversations are, I think, really fleshing this to the surface so we can access more of our true and living light and our life force. We're seeking our life force again, and to breathe free and clear and clean. And I want to thank you for joining us. You can find us at wholesoulmastery.com and on many social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube at Whole Soul Mastery, Rumble. There's a few new ones that I'm adding. So look for us if you find these inspiring and engaging, these conversations that are really for the hero's journey in these times. Look for us at Whole Soul Mastery. And until next time, blessings. Namaste.